Good luck to everyone who's joining us. Shavua Tov. This is the weekly Masil Shisharm Shir, the class on the Path of the Just, and we're just starting chapter 17. We use the Art Scroll edition, which is on page 322. So this book, which we are studying, is the step-by-step way to spiritual growth and getting close to God, developing a relationship with Hashem. So this week, we're on the level of Tahara, spiritual purity. Last week we learned what spiritual purity is, and this week we're going to discuss how to acquire it. Now, spiritual purity means that in the physical actions we do, our intent is for the right reason, to serve Hashem. For instance, when we eat breakfast, we're not just eating to fill our stomachs, but we're eating because we want to have strength to serve God. Also, spiritual purity means that when we do mitzvos, when we serve Hashem by fulfilling the commandments, we have the proper intent in the commandments, that we don't do the mitzvos to receive honor or reward, but rather we fulfill the mitzvos to serve Hashem, because Hashem wants us to do it. Now, these things are a very tall order. So the Ramchal is going to tell us that the way we achieve these levels, and it's important to remember, just as an aside before we begin, even though to observe these levels right off the bat is extremely difficult, but it's important for us to know what level we're shooting for, what level we're aiming for, and so that we know where we're going. And even if we're not on this level in every area of our life, it could be there are certain times of the day or certain mitzvahs that we do, or even parts of a mitzvah, where we could have the proper intent and we could grow spiritually in this area. So now, what is the general concept of how to grow spiritually? How do we make these ideas real to ourselves that we can put them into practice? So the general concept, which the Ramchal is going to tell us, is to sit and think about them, to contemplate, to take a few minutes a day or whatever it is, and to think what's important. The Ramchal is going to get into details. But if we don't have that set time, we don't set aside time to think about our spiritual growth, then we're doomed from the start. This is something Ramchal mentioned at the beginning of Masil Shisharm also. In fact, this was one of the tricks of Paro. We read these past couple weeks in the Parsha of the leaving of the Jews from Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, and one of the tricks that Paro did was to give the Jews so much menial labor that they didn't even have time to sit and think about how to rebel. When we're always busy and we have a million things to do, we don't have a chance to sit and think about what's really important in life. And that's what the Yetzer Hara tries to get us to be so busy that we don't even have 5 minutes to think. Right? Even when we're waiting for a doctor's appointment now, used to be you wait for a doctor's appointment, maybe you had time to sit and think a little bit, contemplate different ideas, and think about things. But now we just take out our phones and we play with our phones. So even in those times that we used to have in the past, where maybe we had, a few minutes to just sit and think about things, now it's just taken over by playing on our phones or going through social media. So this is an area that is very difficult for all of us. But it's so important just to take that time and think. Now, what are we supposed to be thinking about? So let's get started. Let's see what the Ramchal says. Hine, hadarech lahasik hamida hazos kal hu l'mi shekvar hishtadel v'hisik hamidas hashnuyas adhena. To reach this level that we're talking about now, it's easy for someone who has already reached the previous levels. Ki hine kishiyakshav v'yizbonim al pchisos tanugei ha'olam v'tovasov. When a person sits and contemplates on the low level and the crass and the low level of physical pleasures in this world and what the world has to offer, like I wrote earlier, when a person sits and contemplates that physical pleasures, they don't last, right? You eat a good food and right away you forget about it. You do other physical pleasures and right away you forget about it. Often, we feel guilty after, especially if someone's on a diet and he just wants that bag of chips. So for 5 minutes it feels good and then right away he regrets it. So if we sit and we contemplate that where are physical pleasures going to get us in the end and what they're really worth, we will develop a natural repulsion towards them. Because in the world, we have two parts of us. especially as Jews and human beings, we have two parts. We have the part of us which desires physical pleasures, which is natural, right? We want to eat, we want to do other things. We also have a part of us which desires spirituality, to get close to Hashem, to get close to God. So since we're in a physical world, we're in a material world, so to say, if it's very hard to distance ourselves from these physical pleasures unless we spend the time to think about the reality of them and how they're really nothing, and what a low level of pleasure they are, and how it's meaningless because those physical pleasures don't last and they're going to go away. So the Ramchal tells us we have to contemplate and we have to think about these things. So a person will get to the point after contemplating the deficiencies and the low levels in physical pleasures of eating and whatnot. He'll be repulsed by it. He won't want anything to do with it. That will weaken his desire to go after those things. So it will become easier for him to desist from engaging in them. Al-Kain. So all the more when a person spends more time delving into it and thinking to himself to recognize the low level of these physical pleasures, it'll be easier for him to purify his thoughts, to not go after the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, in any of his actions. He'll get to a point where to engage in physical pleasures, it will be like forced. He has created the idea in himself of the low level of physical pleasures that they become disgusting to him, and that he only eats because he has to sustain himself. Now, obviously, this is a very high level, but there's a whole spectrum here. You have people that run after any good food that they can, any physical desire that they have, and you have people that are totally repulsed by physical pleasures, very holy people. Like I've mentioned, Rav Aaron Leib Steinman ate like a piece of bread or something the entire day, just because he had to keep himself alive. So you have a whole spectrum, but the idea is to think about this thing, and we all know that if we think about it logically, eventually, after 120, we're all going to die, and our bodies are going to decompose, and the physical pleasure is going to be nothing. So when we make that idea real to ourselves by sitting and contemplating that idea, it will be easier to separate from those pleasures. And while we might not get to the level of Aaron Leib Steinman, nevertheless, we will lessen our desire to run after these things. So now, talking in general, just like the purity of thought has two parts, one is in physical pleasures, like we mentioned before, a person has to be pure in his thoughts when he engages in his physical needs, and he also has to be pure in his thoughts when he performs mitzvahs. So too, the contemplation that one has to do to acquire this is divided into two. Kihine, letahir machshavto b'maisa gufanios, haderchu lahasmin histakluso al prisos ha'olam v'tanugav. So like we mentioned before, the way to, when it comes to the physical desires, what one has to do is to contemplate the lowliness of those physical pleasures, k'moshe kasafti, like I mentioned. Ulatar machshavto b'maisa avodaso, yarba hisbonenus al tarmis hakavod uch zava v'yargel atzmo livrach mimenu. Now there's another Yetzer Hara. So up until now we've been talking about physical pleasures, but there is another Yetzer Hara that afflicts mankind and womankind, is the drive for honor. Most of us, all of us literally have a Yetzer Hara, have an evil inclination to feel important. We have egos. We want to be praised. We want to be important. We want to have power. If we admit it to ourselves, this is a real desire that people have. So a person, in order to weaken that Yetzer Hara, has to sit and contemplate how fake that desire is, right? If you feel important, eventually, after 120, like I said before, we're not going to be here anymore. All the honor that a person got, he was a boss, and he had a lot of employees working for him, or he was honored at a dinner, and everyone said how great he is, and he had a lot of money, and everyone looked up to him because of his money, and he had power, he could influence people, he was an important CEO or politician. All of that is not going to matter at all in the end of the day. That is not going to matter. I feel like if I ask now, if anyone remembers the 22nd president, I feel like 99% of people listening right now do not know offhand who the 22nd president is. But when he was alive, He was in the newspaper every day. Everybody was talking about him. He was very important, very powerful. But now, 100 years later, 150 years later, whatever it is, nobody even can remember his name. Because kavod, honor, ego, it's all fake and meaningless. Now, even though we might know this intellectually, we still have a desire to go after these things. So how do we weaken that desire? We take time to sit and contemplate and think about it. And think about how, and reinforce those ideas which you know are true about the fake nature and how illusory it is. Honor, how fake honor is. Az yanake be'es avodaso mipnos el hashevach vel hatehila asher yahalu b'nei adam v'tia machshavto pona b'yichud el adainenu asher hu tilasenu. So that a person should direct, instead of thinking about his own honor, he'll direct his thoughts to his master, to Hashem, and that he'll be praised. And that's the only honor that we should go after. A real honor that lasts forever, even after we're dead, is the honor that we receive after we're gone for serving Hashem. Who called Tovenu Shleimusenu, and this is all our good and all our completeness. Ve'evizulas, there's nothing else. V'cheinu oimer hu silascha v'hu elokecha. He is your praise. He is your God. Meaning the only real honor that exists forever after we're dead. What do we take with us? We take with us our good deeds, the mitzvahs we did, and the Torah we learned. Everything else, nada. It's gone. It's meaningless. So that is the only real honor, the real only thing that we should go after in life. Now we're going to talk about tahara. How do we get tahara when it comes to doing mitzvahs? Until now, we've been talking about how to do tahara, spiritual purity, when it comes to our physical actions. Now, what about when it comes to doing mitzvahs? So, the way that a person comes to this attribute, hu hazmana l'divrei avoda v'mitzvahs, is preparation for avoda and mitzvahs, for service of Hashem. V'hainu, which means shlo yikanes b'kiyum hamitzvahs b'pesa pisom she'in daito adam yushavas alav v'chayla lizbonin b'mashi huayse. Don't just rush into a mitzvah without thinking about what you're doing. Ela yazmin atzmo l'davar v'yachan libo b'maton ad sheyikanes b'hizboninus v'az yizbonin mahu holech la'asos. Rather, a person should slowly, before he does the mitzvah, he should take a moment and say to himself, what am I doing right now? I'm about to put on tefillin. What does that mean? I'm about to fulfill God told me to put on tefillin, to serve him by doing this, and that's what I'm about to do, to fulfill that mitzvah. I'm fulfilling the will of Hashem. He shouldn't just do it very quickly and not even pay attention to what he's doing. Shahari bihikanso bi'iyun hazeh, when he thinks about it, it will be easy for him to cast off other thoughts in his mind. And to set in his heart the proper intent. V'tira, we see sha'chasidim harishainim hayushayim sha'achas kodem tfilasim va'achar kach mispalalim. In the Gemara it says that the early pious people, they would actually contemplate for an hour before they would pray, to get in the right mindset, to think about what they were doing. They would meditate for an hour, so that their hearts should be towards Hashem. Now, it says they used to spend an hour. It doesn't mean they were just wasting time for an hour. They were thinking about what they were going to pray. They were pushing aside all of the extraneous thoughts that had nothing to do with davening. And they were filling their hearts with the fear and love of Hashem. It says, if you prepare your heart and spread forth your hands to him. Now, so we learned so far that when it comes to having purity in our physical actions and purity in our mitzvos, the way to achieve that is by sitting and taking time to just think about what we're doing. People nowadays, we're so busy we don't take the time to think. We see how important it is. A simple thing. It's a simple thing, but we don't do it, just to sit and think. We see how important it is to think, but how hard the Yetzer Hara tries to get us to not think. V'hinei, mafsidei hamida hein chesron ha'izbonenus el hanyanim shezacharnu. What detracts from this midah of tahara, of purity, is a person not contemplating on these topics that we mentioned. The hainu, sichlus p'chisus hatanugim, he doesn't contemplate and think about how silly physical pleasures are. Radifas hakavod, the futility of running after honor. Umiyud ha'achana lavod, and he doesn't spend time thinking about and preparing for his service of Hashem. Ki hashnayim harishonim, the first two things, he mefaten es hamachshava, they entice the thoughts, umamshichen osa el hapnios, and distracts him towards other things, towards physical pleasure and honor. Ki isha hamanafes asher tachas isha tikach ezarm. It's comparable to a married woman who commits adultery. Why? We already call these external thoughts of running after honor and running after physical pleasures znus halev, adultery of the heart. Why? The verse says, you should not go after your heart, after your eyes, which serve to cause you to go astray. So the same word of zonim is used there, of znus, of these extraneous thoughts. The same word in Hebrew, which refers to these extraneous thoughts which distract us from service of Hashem, namely going after physical pleasure and honor, is the same word in Hebrew that's referred to committing adultery. Because what these thoughts cause is that the mind goes away from what it's supposed to. It's perfect ideal, asher haylo likashbo, which he should be striving to achieve. El havolim v'dimyonis kaizvim, to fake things, to false illusions. He, instead of spending his time to serve Hashem and to do mitzvos, he spends his time thinking about honor and thinking about physical pleasures and whatnot. Umiyud achana garim l'sichlos, and when a person doesn't spend time preparing for mitzvos, and that causes the natural foolishness, haba mitzad hachomer, that becomes because of the physical being, shli gorish metocho, that he can't divorce it from himself. Harihu mavish havoda b'sir chono, and he causes a taint in the divine service which causes it to rot. Unavar ata midas hasidus, and now we will explain the attribute of Hasidus. So, what the Ramchal is saying is that human beings are naturally pulled after the physical. We naturally want to feel important. We naturally want to engage in physical pleasures, and we don't necessarily always want to think and do mitzvos. So the only way that we can compete with these natural desires is to sit, to contemplate, and to think of these ideas, and to constantly reinforce these lofty ideals, so that we have a chance to compete with our natural desires for other things. And the only way to do this is we have to, take a set time, whether it's once a day, once a week, whatever it is, as long as it's more than what we're doing now, so that we have a set time to think about and contemplate these lofty ideals, and to reread these chapters, and to do things. Similar types of exercises. And if anyone wants to work it out specifically, what's best for them, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email. Would love to talk further about it. And have a great week, and get your bread and milk before the snow.